Good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the fourth LAESP Symposium. This is the panel, Building the Cities from Below, the Struggle for Housing as a Political Imagination Space and Urban Epistemology. We are receiving today the Beats University represented, Matthew Wilhelm Solomon, and also with the members of the Inner City Federation, which is an organization that represents occupational buildings, occupied building in the center of Johannesburg through the Inner City Foundation. So I'd like to start by thanking the organization of the event that is being absolutely perfect, our colleagues, Maria, Francisca, Lucas, everyone that is involved in the organization of the event. Everything is beautiful, and I'd like to thank all of the persons here. Also to thank my friend Matt to accept the challenge to organize this panel, to put our works in dialogue. This panel represents a partnership that is in the origin of the International LAESP Symposium. So the first International LAESP Symposium was organized during my thesis presentation in 2018 when we brought Professor Julia Hornberger, that she was my professor, and she was here in my defense, and we organized at the same time the first International LAESP Symposium. After that, we had the presence of Matthew that has been with us more than once, and also we have Professor Rogers Orrock from Cameroon, and is associated in the Wits University. And then this panel of the fourth symposium is the continuation of this dialogue. It's a great pleasure to be here for the first time in person after I came back from South Africa, where I lived for 9 years, to be here organizing and present in this event. For me, it's a great joy. So I'm going to start by introducing an idea here to the panel and to the members of our panel. I wasn't able to read what you wrote, but the idea of this panel to grow the city from below incarnates some concerns and some positionings that we have been adopting in this work. The first issue that I like to highlight is the challenge of producing anthropological theory based on the ethnographicity, like the ways of living. From this, you can build an epistemology, a theory that is rooted in the field, respecting the way people think, treat things, and how they value these things. So there's another important dimension of this proposition, which is an ethical proposition. The activity in the ethnographical activity can be a little bit extractivist, let's say, exploring. You go to the field, people give us peers, important things, valuable things that they consider simple. But for us, we withdraw this material and we make it circulate, so it becomes a lot of things. And what do we return to them? What are our works for these people? What do they represent? So not only financial relationships, but you go to the field, especially when you deal with a public, an audience, a group that is in a vulnerable situation, financial, etc., and also in terms of rights. You deal with these people, and when you go away, those people continues in the same condition. Did you contribute in any way to their struggle, in this case, struggle for housing? When you go to the field and you produce this reciprocal relationship, we usually don't think and don't talk about the circulation of money, financial transfers that work and that happens in the field work. So we are also thinking about this reality and what can we do in the anthropological field work, something that can return, something that is reciprocal and not only colonialist in the basis. So we cannot forget that anthropology has a kind of origin in the colonial states. And we cannot consider the effects of this origin in the DNA of the discipline. So a third dimension that is very important politically is the dimension of the search for a new language, a rooted language, to talk about our works, our researches. A lot of the language of the social sciences has been appropriated by the right-wing movements. They started to read the representation of society and started to say that the earth was plane. So let's build our story. So now I'm going to build my own story. So people read the social sciences and they started to use our vocabulary that was built in the social sciences against us to progress with some obscurantist, obscure agenda. And so the search for a new way of thinking, not only a new vocabulary, because the description is not only to speak or to write, is a collective and political process. And we have to think about that. The idea is that the social movements, the struggles, in this case, can be a source for this kind of reflection that has this dimension of language, of ethics, and also epistemological dimension to produce theory from the ethnographic. So I'm going to start by introducing the situation of the field so that people can position themselves. I don't know how many of you know the story, the history of South Africa. Everybody knows apartheid and Mandela. Apartheid was a regime that was concerned about regulating the displacement and the permanence of people in a certain space so as to have them working and living in specific places. And of course they have to do it in separate places, each one in their own corner. So apartheid means separation, each one in their own place, so as not to mix, to have this racial capitalism as an structured regime. So in all Africa, but especially coordinating a structure for the labor, for the workers and mine workers, created a situation in which, for example, the center of Johannesburg, the center of the city, was a white area exclusively. So, of course, the black population could circulate if they worked there or if they had a special authorization. It was a kind of pass, like a passport, so as to be able to circulate inside of your own country. So while this place, the center of Johannesburg, was an exclusively white area up to the 70s, 80s, when the demographic transition starts to happen. So when was a white area? It was a paradise. It was an European city in Africa. So when you offer services in a non-universal way, it's easier to offer a qualified service because you're not offering that it's the same for everybody. It's for the privileged population. So this center worked very well. So with the end of the apartheid, the black population, were displaced to the northern part of the Johannesburg. So the center of the city migrated. A demographic transition was happening in a radical way, and the population went to the northern part with the richest suburbs. All the financial capital were moving to this area, and the center of Johannesburg became with this beautiful buildings of the golden age of Johannesburg. Johannesburg, up to the 80s, 54% of the gold richness in the world circulated in Johannesburg. The nickname of the city was the Golden City. So the empty buildings of this golden city with marvelous architectures, they were occupied by the black population. That from the moment in which the apartheid ends, they can access the city. They can live in the city. So the city started to be taken by this population. So the center of Johannesburg has this characteristic of being a kind of a peripheral area. But at the same time, it's the place where a lot of money circulates. So when Eduardo Rodrigues went to Johannesburg, they are not here, but Matthew explained to us, when you look at the buildings, we have a lot of retail services, retail products, stores. This space of the stores are very expensive. Okay, they have the same price of the richer suburbs in the northern part of the city. But from for example, the first floor above, it's occupation. So you see the building, the lower part of the building is very expensive, very, it's valued, and the upper part is an occupation in a way that it can be similar of our communities, of more vulnerable communities in Brazil, but in a building, a vertical community. So it's very interesting to think about it, because once the segregation is not legal anymore, it's not something that it's in the legislation, the ways of segregating in South Africa are similar to informal ways of segregation that we have in Brazil also. So what happens today, and this is our conflict, and I'm going to end my introduction, the conflict in which we are working with, and this federation, inner city federation, also is facing the issue, is that this situation of decadence that has been created from the moment in which we had this demographic transition, the city hall, the city of Johannesburg, has chosen, in a neoliberal way, to rescue the center of Johannesburg, giving parts of the center to developing projects that are led by private companies, real estate agencies and companies. So the work that the center of this city has is to really displace these persons that are living in these buildings. And so they use a lot of police force in this sense. This is part of my work, but I'm going to talk about it in another moment. So the police force in South Africa in this situation works as a kind of an informal displacement from the housing. So they don't have legal right for that housing. So the police force creates such an impossible condition for the person to work that they are really forced to move as an eviction process. So the private companies, they are now in charge of developing these areas, this developing projects. So the struggle of inner city federation is to assure the right of these people to remain in these buildings and to resist these evictions that are mostly illegal. So this is the situation, explaining in a very simple and way. I'm going to recommend to you that the ones that would like to know the story of inner city, there is this book that Matthew wrote, okay, The Inner City, 10 years of research in the center of Johannesburg. which is this area that I research, thinking about the police force relationship with the persons. And Matthew works about the dimension, the life dimensions, in the sense that he's going to explain. So now I'm going to ask the members of Inner City Federation, because we're going to start the dynamics of exchanging microphones. You just speak. I'm going to pass the floor now to Inner City Federation. Online with us, we have our dear Siabonga Maklango, which is the president of the Inner City Federation. Sifiso Zuma, is also part of the board of directors of the organization. Tobili Zondo and Freda Mochuane. Both of them are coordinators of a specific panel for women victims of domestic violence, so treating specifically of the situation of women in the occupation. Tobile Freda are going to talk about this, and Siabonga and Sifiso are going to talk about the work in general of the Federation. Siabonga, please, the floor.
Thank you, Beth, for having us in this such nice discussion we think that it will strengthen our relationship for future. And then I'll start by saying that the Inner City Federation is the organization that was formed by the Inner City resident during mid-2015. And the reason why this organization was formed is because we saw a need of liaising officials, and then we protecting and promoting the residents' right, who are facing the threat of eviction, who are facing the unlawful eviction, who are facing the raids that their home are being raided by the police without following the proper channels of raiding a home of a person. So that's why we formed the Inner City Federation. The Inner City Federation has the 15 leadership of its executive, and this executive was elected by its members from different buildings, and the Inner City Federation is representing 131 buildings as we speak now. That buildings, it's a homes of thousands of people from different countries of Africa and other continent. So the work that we do it each and every day. And we have managed to take our own government to court for so many times, of which, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 60 to 70 cases against our own government, because what they are doing, it's illegal and it's against the law if they will evict people without Tim, can you hear me? Everyone can hear me.
Lost. gente pede para
Essa coisa do papel parece que funcionou. E de repente colocar para ele sair e voltar. Please leave the room and come back. Ou então exit and come back. Exit and come back. Yeah, he cannot hear us.
entrar e sair da sala. Gente, lá são 5 horas de diferença.
I can hear you, Beth. I can.
Oh, great. Now we can hear you too.
Tem que falar, porque ele não ouve
We can hear you too now. Now let's go then. Please
Okay,
sit
I
down
think
there,
that's fine.
please.
Okay. If guys you can't hear me, please inform me. I know that this is the new technology. Everyone is still trying to learn about this. Okay, no. Now I think I'll have to start afresh and to introduce the Inner City Federation. Inner City Federation, it's a movement that was formed by the inner city residents that they are facing the threat of eviction, and the ones that are being illegally evicted from their homes. And as the inner city resident, we saw a need of collaborating and form this organization so that we'll share our knowledge and experiences, because there was no platform in Johannesburg where the inner city residents can share their experiences and knowledges of what is happening within their homes. And we started by engaging directly with the city of Johannesburg, and we saw that we don't succeed, of which we take a stance of taking our own government to court so that our rights as the inner city residents are being protected and promoted and being fulfilled as we've been promised in the Constitution of South Africa. So we came together, we formed this organization, and we are now representing 130 buildings within the inner city of Johannesburg. And we are speaking of thousands of people who are residing within these buildings. And we are also working hand in hand with different organizations like Abahlali Basemjondolo, Seri, Nelson Mandela Foundation, Ndifuna Ukwazi, Tswana Urban Activist, Madara Center from Kenya, and Water Poverty from Netherlands, SSA from Uganda, Youth for Parliament from Zambia, with other organizations. And we are also working with independent people like Dr. Matthew Williamson, Elizabeth, and there are also others that we do work with. And on the work that we do on our daily basis is to carry the struggle, is to make sure that people's rights are protected, are defended, people are being treated in dignity. And we also tried to put women first in a way that we created Inner City Federation Women's Desk that Frida and Tobilo, they will speak more deeper about it. And we saw a need of establishing that desk so that we make sure that children's and women are more protected, because we know that they are not being put in first in South Africa. Instead, there are victims of GBV, there are victims of evictions, and etc. So we saw a need of establishing that desk, and we tried our best to make sure that being poor in South Africa does not become a crime, but as the matter stands, being poor and being homeless in South Africa, it's a crime because we are being criminalized, being called names. We are being displaced from the city because we don't have got nothing. We are earning low. Others, they are not even earning anything. They are earning zero. So that's why there is an Inner City Federation and other organizations that we do work with to make sure that no one is coming to our home and raid our home without the warrant. No one is kicking our doors and search us without following the proper procedure. No one is criminalizing us without following the proper procedure, because we are being called with different names. We are being called hijackers. We are being called foreigners. We are being called so many names that discriminate us as the residents of the inner city. So as the members and the Inner City Federation, we are fighting against those challenges that black and white and Indians and other colors and different races that they are facing. This organization, it's protecting all people from different countries. We don't work according to the race where you are from. That's why we are working with one of our amazing friend, who is she always taking care of us, but she's always there for us since we know her and living together with her. She's been there for us. She's one of us. She's visiting our homes. We are visiting her homes. She's open to us. So we are making sure that people like her and others, they are protected. They are being treated with dignity as long as they are within the country. Yes, we know that there is a promise in our constitution that says South Africa belongs to those who lives in it, but it's just a say, because we are not, we think that South Africa doesn't not belongs to poor people, regardless of race. But if you are poor, you don't belong to South Africa, in a way that you will be displaced and put in the townships that are not even well developed. So that's what I can, for now, say about the Inner City Federation. But I think we can say more during this discussion, and we know that we'll be learning something from you guys from Brazil, because we had so much about people from Brazil, and there are some other organizations that we know from Brazil. So I would like to stop there, and I would like to give the floor back to Beth so that she can channel this discussion in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebonga. I'd like to ask Freda if she could speak a little bit about the women's desk, that take care of the work that you and Tobili do.
Okay, hi everyone. How you doing? Hi everyone. How you doing? Yes, this is Frida speaking, coming to talk about ICF Women's Desk. ICF Women's Desk, it's a platform that was formed especially for women that around inner city that's been experiencing that kind of GBV, not knowing where to go. Then always they go run into Seri, not knowing that Seri is working with law only, not more than law. So they end up forming this platform for women, called ICF Women's Desk, so that we can deal with GBV. We're working hands to hands with the police around inner city in general. All the police stations around inner city, we're working hands to hands with them. the social worker within the police station, the clinics, some organization like Izwi, Power, and other organization like 41 Fox Street, where we refer some of our clients, especially those who are using substances, and Section 27. At Section 27, they dealing more especially with school kids, those who their parents are struggling maybe to pay school fees, and those who are struggling to have IDs and birth certificate for their kids. Then we refer them to Section 27, working hands to hands with Section 27. That's where mostly we are referring, because and clinics also, because some of our clients, when they come to consult, they end up some of them, their issues are more, so that we end up referring them to clinics, studying at clinics, so that they can observe what their problem is before they can go and open the case. As much as I explained earlier on, that we're working hands to hands with the police around inner city in general. So from clinics, we refer them to go to police station to open the case according to their problems. And we're working hands to hands with the judge control, the detectives within the police station, because the detectives, they are those who work with the cases, and we make follow-ups, because when our clients, they open the case, some of them tomorrow, they're going to see the perpetrator roaming around the street, not knowing how did their case end up. So we make follow-ups within those police station to within those detectives, and to control judges. We make follow-up and ask about how did the case goes for them to see the perpetrator roaming around the street, so that that our clients can be also satisfied about how did their case end up. And again, the people who comes to us, like some of them, they are using substances, then we end up referring them to 41 Fox Street, where they deal with some sort of those things, like referring them to rehab center, so that they can heal from those substances, and so on, and other things. I'm gonna leave for my colleague to fill up wherever I didn't mention. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Freda.
Thank you.
Now we will hear our comrade Fazer. Please. Fazer, can you hear us? You have the floor. Fazer, can you hear us? Can you speak? Fazer, can you hear us? Please let us know. No, we can hear you now.
You are breaking. I can't hear you.
Tá, o sinal tá quebrando, tá. Fazer. It's important we bought some data package so our colleagues from the Inner City Federation could be part. It's 7:30 at night. In South Africa, they are in occupations. They don't have easy access to internet, so we bought some data packages. That's why this participation is very complicated, but we're doing our best. We lost Sifiso. When Sifiso returns, we'll ask him to speak when we'll have the audience participation. Now I'll pass the floor to Professor Matthew Wilhelm Solomon from Wits University from the Anthropology Department, so he can speak about his work. Can you hear me? Thank you for ISP, Lenin Beth, for the invitation from my colleagues of ICF. I hope that in the future you may be able to visit Brazil as well. I'll present a part of in the book of Shubandam. It's called the Johannesburg Laws of Metropolis. Is an old book, but can you hear me? Okay, now it's better. So I'll read it. Around 1 a.m. on 31st August of 2023, the old office of the past office of apartheid in the corners of the road Albert and Dover's in Marshalltown caught fire. The fire killed 76 people, among them 12 children. The initial reason motives of the fire on the building was the effect of methamphetamine. So to cover up the crime, they put fire on the building, and they bought fuel in a nearby gas station. The fire spread out throughout the building. The foreman arrived at 1:30. Nearly all the roads, the doors were sealed, and it took more than 4 hours to control the fire. Can I carry on? On September of 2025, only 6 days after the divulgation of the report, she declared that I want South Africa to know that I never took the life of those people. I've lived alone in an alley, and surviving was the only way. So the fire is still involved in mystery, but this situation really represents a huge challenge in the city. We have buildings that are occupied. We have occupations and unlawful occupations in the inner city, in the downtown Johannesburg, and they have hijacked. We have dark alleys, dark places where hundreds of people live. They resist the stable narratives. But the reason the fire spread out so quickly and killed so many was really something that needs to be discussed. this language of hijacked buildings, as the CEO was telling, is a very significant language, because there are some buildings with gangs, with drug dealers, but they are the minority of the buildings of the inner city occupations. Most of the occupations are buildings occupied by homeless people. And there's this language of hijacked language, or of hijacked buildings, that is not the whole reality of the area. So, what really caused the fire? We have several conditions. The building was inaugurated in April 25, 1954, nearly 40 years before the first democratic elections. In 1996, it was the City Hall of Johannesburg used as a female shelter. The contract was terminated in 2008, and the building was occupied in several other people. That this is the building after the fire. So in the building, several sheds were built with highly flammable wood and glue. The only way out of the building was blocked, and they had firefighting systems had been removed for recycling. The electric wires were exposed. They had water-rating fire systems, and also they had blocked ventilation, and the stairs were obstructed. So there's many research started in 2010. And I had seen very similar conditions several times with the civil society, with ICF. They had been complaining about it for more than a decade, asking for a response from the city hall, from the police. Why did they abandon the buildings? Or for private companies to respond, or with police operations. In my book, I wrote about several fires. We had more than 16 fatal fires documented previously before 2003, before this tragedy, in different buildings surrounding that area. The signs were present for those who wanted to see. On September 2023, I visited the building after the fire. The building was surrounded. Surrounded with wires and garbage in several places. The walls of brick walls, they were showing the concrete parts of the building. There were groups in the sidewalks, and people really shocked. We had Muslim women distributing food from private cars. The response of several politicians of the city was to try to blame the dwellers, the occupants of the building. That was part of a longer rhetorical speech by the residents of the building. South Africa had a huge deportation program and a speech of xenophobia, but within the occupations they had South Africans and foreign people. After the fire, the media was really interested, and the report said there was said that it was a building only with immigrants, but that's not true. Several South African people died in the fire. So they responded that the private sector, the public sector, they really tried to blame the people in the buildings. So there were several lawsuits in the Constitutional Court, in the Supreme Court of South Africa, and the court decided that evictions were unconstitutional. To solve problems in the street in 2020, they decided that new police operations without warrants should not be taken forward. Actually, the problem is that South Africa has strong rights and rules. I believe it's the same thing here in Rio, in Brazil, where the state, the police, they ignore people's rights. This was a huge atrocity, a huge tragedy, and it was part of a long process. But it's also a kind of reproduction of an apartheid process where black workers were responsibilized for several situations. So it carried on this past, bring some ghosts of the past. In my book, I've documented several evictions, police violence, private security, the Red Lancers, the Red Ants, and they are very violent. And people always lose their belongings, they lose money, generally there's violence. And the occupations always have several families, children, women, and there are spaces where people try to find a way to live with dignity. Also, I wrote in my book, in the beginning of the Inner City Federation, about the process, the beginning, the narrative, and I tried to document people's lives, people's families during some years, but also we've organized some workshops where people could be taking part. And they have influenced the pedagogy, the education based on the workshops that we were working on.
Well, we have many parties, political parties, where I'm going to switch for this. Also an opposition that was illegal, where the city mayor was Herman Machaba, who declared shock and against shocking political actions against the migrants. And these politics were against the acknowledgement of the inner city federation movement. So they started to open spaces for discussions, for plannings, together with the inner city federation representatives. But after the fire, also, we had a great protest in the center of the town, including inner city federation. They organized this protest as part of a memorial tribute for the victims of the fire, but also to try to put light in some of the events that were happening in the downtown. And all this protest was filmed, registered, and I took part of the juridical commission about the investigations, involved in the investigations, and I took part of the commission as a specialist witness in November 2024. And the sessions happened in the auditorium at the center of the Saibon building in downtown. So, of course, there was a strange feeling and a contradiction also between that elegant auditorium and also the persons that were there. And it wasn't registered. It was the media didn't talk about the events. There's almost nothing that we could reach and could have as because it's an expectable policy. And so during the process, we didn't have access to a lot of material. So many activists investigated specifically the building and also about the occupation. And it was part of a background that was necessary to understand the conditions that took to the fire, that led to the fire. And also they presented as evidence a lot of evidences, so assuming a new form as a juridical objects. They also tried to connect the point for the affidavit in this process. It was a very particular situation that was out when they tried to transform the city, downtown city, and all the experiences of intimacy, grief and everything in a legible form for a legal process. So this is very important for these epistemological and ethnographical debates. How can we represent the complexity of life in the center of that city in a legible way for the media or for a juridical process? Because otherwise it's something very easy to happen. For example, Gary Gillespie, an anthropologist, who is my colleague, is reflecting about her own experience as a member of the commission. So when you work in this kind of field, how can we implicate our work, our written work also in these processes, and how can it also influence the social policies, because of the complexity in the ethnography can be used also in other processes. But at the end, if you don't have it registered, if it also was presented in the commission talking about the experiences in the center of the city, and now I'm going to read the words that Siyabonga used, but he can also talk about this experience. But in general, the commission and the results of this commission as a report was in favor of our perspective. The commission accomplished an investigation that demonstrated with no doubt that the crisis was and they found out that almost 80% of the buildings presented the risk for fire. But it's very important to say that the report is in accordance with our perspective about this work, hijacked buildings. So that this part of the final report, the investigation demonstrates without doubt that the emerging crisis is not due mainly to hijacking of buildings, but to a complex interaction between extreme poverty, critical lack of housing policies and projects, and also generalized systemic failures. So the investigation also concluded that this crisis is not due to the hijacking of the buildings. So this was very important because the struggle in the inner city federation of the persons who live there, the residents of this area, was recognized as legitimate. So there's also other things, like it's not clear how the results of the commission will be used by the mayor, by the state. We still have a struggle of the movements for anthropologists and others to see, and also the movements as Inner City Federation, to see how can they assure to make sure that the results were implemented or are going to be implemented. So after the report, nothing really changed. So we have to continue struggling and fighting. So I'm going to interrupt my presentation and we can talk a little bit more about it later. Thank you very much, Matt. Just to make a parenthesis, I'd like to give the opportunity to Cifiso. Cifiso, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you, even though sometimes I've lost you.
Yes, but now you.
but I can hear you now.
Sim, pode falar, camarada.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can speak. You can speak. You can go.
What do you want me to speak about?
Ele está perguntando o que você quer que ele fale, sobre o que você quer que ele fale.
Audiência e fala do seu trabalho.
Introduce yourself to our audience and talk about your work. Okay? Introduce yourself and talk about your work.
Okay, my name is
Oh,
Ok.
go ahead, whenever you want.
Eu acho que ele não está recebendo muito bem.
Zoom. I think my colleague he spoke more about our work, but what I also want to add about the work that we are doing on those buildings that we are working on. We usually encourage our clients. We usually encourage our clients to select committees onto those buildings so that it should be easier to communicate with them if there's a committee, because it's not easy to communicate with everyone among the buildings. That's why we always told the communities that they must select the committees. What I also want to mention, about the raids that are happening in the inner city. Today, early in the morning, around 7 o'clock, there were so many police where I'm staying. They were looking for alcohol, but it was not only where I'm staying. They also go to other places where they were looking for alcohol. But where I'm staying, I managed to stop them because they wanted to enter to my home. But I asked them about the search warrant because the colonel who was in charge for that operation, I managed to speak with him because he was also present on that time. Then after our conversation, they've just left without entering my home. But I don't know in other places, or they did manage to enter the people's home. That's what I've experienced today, because I thought the raids are not that much, but I think now they are back to enter people's home. That's what I've experienced today. That's why I want to mention the raids in the inner city. Thank you.
Thank you, Cifiso.
Tobili, você quer se apresentar?
Tobili, would you like to introduce yourself? Tobili?
Quando a gente tenta recuperar a família, queria dar só contexto para essas falas.
I just would like to give some context to what they said, because after the apartheid in South Africa, the right for housing and for privacy was protected by the South African Constitution. Why? Because before, while the apartheid was still there, people were simply displaced because to make a neighborhood become a white neighborhood, you had to promote these displacements. So after the apartheid ended, the right for housing, the right for being in the certain place was protected by the legislation. But once the center of the city was occupied, and this mayor, his name is Herman Mashaba, he decided, of course, to regain the control of the city and to fight violence and etc., and gave this part of the city to the private sector. He thought, well, I cannot displace people as if the apartheid were legal. So the state, in a very neoliberal way, in a very Brazilian way, because we know the relation we have with the legislation, he starts to create new strategies because he's not acting based on the legislation and he's making a guerrilla against people. What does the state do? It creates situation to make people's lives unbearable, to make them leave voluntarily. So what do they do? They cut the services, and the police force is involved with the cutting of the services like light, cut water, and people start to make fire inside the unities to warm themselves. So it's an electrical installation that is really in horrible conditions, creating this condition of precarity that gives origin to the fires. So what Matthew was presenting, I contributed with his presentation because I work with the police force, I work researching the police force, and what Matt presented was a good example. What do our research serve for? So in this investigation, the state was responsibilized. This policy of cutting the service and making the environment a horrible one so as to make people leave, that's what is producing the fires. So the disabled policy, it's also the immigrant, it's also the vulnerable population that will pay for it. So cutting the services, displacing people, and also in the police force operations, a lot of people lose documents like ID. And so the next time the police force will have another operation, or the state representatives to try to expel people, they're going to ask, where is your document? I don't have. So if you don't have documents, so they restart this story. It's the state itself in this process of making the situation very vulnerable and to treat people in a very displeasant way to create these strategies. In the case of the police force operation, what I studied in South Africa is very interesting to compare with the Brazilian case, because in 2020 in South Africa, the ICF, Inner City Federation, together with the Surrey, started a popular suit against the state, questioning a group of 39 police operations that happened in the center of Johannesburg. In these operations, the department, the Interior Department that takes care of the immigrants, they send the police force to responsibilize someone for something. The city used the opportunity of the police operations to put people in a line and to ask documents of people to see if they were South Africa. And this used to happen in the middle of the night. The police was knocking at your door to put you on a line to see your documents, to check your documents to see if you are a foreigner. And the irony is that one of the articles that I read about it is that the doors, the fire door, the exit doors were closed so as to avoid criminality. It was also to avoid these police operations. So to avoid to wake up in the middle of the night with the police pointing again to your face. So the majority of the bodies were found behind these exit doors, these fire exit doors. So it's the state putting the police to enter the occupations that is creating the situation that afterwards the state criminalizes. So there is a terminological dispute that Matthew was presenting, and also Siabong, between hijacked buildings and occupations. Because all the reason of the problem is putting the fact that there are some criminal syndicates or criminal syndicates. These criminal syndicates that hijack the unities of the buildings and they sell it illegally. Does it happen? Yes. There are buildings that are hijacked, and there are levels of hijacking. And there are some buildings that some units are hijacked, but not all of them. There are some buildings that are in a very precarious situation that were abandoned a long time ago, and there are some buildings that have organization and have a cleaning system that are organized by the residents that are completely different of the situation that the state is portraying to justify the evictions. So what Sia was saying is that it's unlawful evictions. They are using other ways. The state is creating the problem, and the state criminalizes to justify the eviction, lawful eviction. So it's like the continuity of the apartheid. Displace people to open downtown for the business. We have to reopen the downtown for the business. And so this implies to expel the population again for the peripheral areas. So another thing that I would like to highlight is that for us, I wrote an article about it that is the prohibition of using the alcohol. So now they are trying to find illegal business of alcohol, illegal alcohol outlets. They call it shabins, which are small stores that sell alcohol classified as illegal, and they're going after these shabins. So besides this emphatic prohibition of the alcohol consumption, so during the pandemics, they were not allowed to sell alcohol in South Africa. So we had a wave of violence, police violence, because the police was having completely the right to use the violence against it. So another strange thing is that in South Africa, the police cannot stop anyone, right, to just to frisk the person to see whatever you have. So this was because of the performance that was common during the apartheid. So, well, who are you? Where are you going to? Who is your mother? It reminds the performance of asking the pass, which was the inner passport, to see if you could be or not in a certain area. So this was also protected by the Constitution. And what I analyzed was about another situation because the police cannot do this kind of risk because of this memory of the apartheid. But there was a section in the police legislation in South Africa that allowed, in the cases of emergency, in the case of order disruption, this generic interpretation that allows police to do anything. In this case, the police force could circle a certain area and create an exception space. So inside this space, the limited police could access the apartments and to do whatever they wanted. So the movement of the Inner City Federation, together with CERN, that congregates lawyers, pro bono lawyers, they suited this, and the social movement win the cause. It was in the same time of the polemics that we had here with the police forces. So the social movements in South Africa, they had a victory, and they changed the police legislation and to exclude this section that allowed the police force to circulate in this exception area. So what Sifiso is pointing out, that's why he said the operations are coming back. So during a time, this constitutional judgment was efficient. In my field work in 2023 up to 2025, the buildings that were part of the case, because this case was applied in 10 buildings that were suffering the police operation, they affirmed that, no, we are protected. We have a judgment here. We have a judgment, and we are protected. But apparently, with the influence of the political leadership, which is very important because it reminds us of the period that we had here in Rio de Janeiro with Cláudio Castro, influences the police action. And nowadays, the police is coming back, and they are doing this kind of operation again, the violence, the right of housing for the population. So this is the context of our work. In my case, how do I use the building the cities from below? I explore the implications, the epistemological and political implications of the way they won this case, this lawsuit. Because in the process where they won, they claimed the idea that the police actions were working as an informal evictions. The objective of the police in terms of their operation was one thing, and what they really delivered was another thing. So these police operations were informal evictions, and as I understood this, I started to work with these police, working in the urban infrastructure. The police has to combat the crime, has to, of course, work against the criminal actions, but not in this kind of work of urban infrastructure. So the police is cutting services in the buildings. They are happening just because they have the protection of the police. The police, they go to these buildings and they give the permission, they apprehend documents, they steal money, they put some units down, because some of them, they are made with more fragile material. So in these operations, all the structure of the person's house is destroyed. So the police is working as an action of urban infrastructure. So the housing is being affected. The house of these people are being affected by the actions of the police. So in this work, I thought about police and state in a different way. So, Tobili is there? Tobili? Tobili, introduce yourself, please, to us.
I started doing the work with Tabila and Freda about women in inner city and security strategies within inner city. And one of the protection factors that we have been explored and is their church. I've been going to their church, so they're part of the evangelical church that is in an occupied building in downtown Johannesburg, and I went there, and I went, and also I went to the activities they do. No, can you see? No, we cannot see. So let's begin our debate. So we're opening for the audience. If Tabili can also introduce herself, she's very important. We have Lenny, then Edilson, and then Cacao here. I think I have to go forward. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lenin. I'm last coordinator, professor of the Public Security Department. I'd like to thank Matthew for being here, coming once again. I know it's not easy to leave your home, going to another country. It's really exhausting. Thank you so much. And also I'd like to thank the members of Inner City for the time and interest of being with us to discuss these issues. And I wanted to bring briefly a few experiences. I did some field work in Buenos Aires between 2007 and 2009. It was 1 year doing my field work. It was divided this time. And it's very similar to what we have. It's in terms of building occupation. I think that Edilson is going to talk about it. We have several buildings in Rio and in Niterói that are occupied by populations that they don't have a place to live, and they're part of a strong movement, which is the homeless movement. We have a minister of the Lula government, and he is a leader of this movement, Guilherme Boulos. Today he's the minister of he's one of the ministers of the government, some chief of staff or something. He's a young person, an economist, but he's really linked to this movement. But here in Rio, it's very strong in São Paulo, but here in Rio, this movement is strong as well. And this group is really different from the invasion category, which is different from the landless movement, rural movement. And they started disputing with the Brazilian elites. We have an occupation because we have buildings or lands in the rural areas that are unoccupied, and these things need to be occupied to have a social commitment, as it needs to have a social role. In Buenos Aires, it's not a lecture, but is just sharing an experience. In Buenos Aires, I saw a different phenomenon. People were occupying buildings, but they were called the casas tomadas, taken homes or taken houses. And another interesting phenomenon, which were the factories, and they called recovered factories. I think that what inner city does is really interesting because, in my point of view, is recovering the city, recovering houses that were abandoned by those who always exploited the black people, as in general, as we call it in general, the black population in South Africa, and through a resistance movement, they let these places to have a social role. So started seeing this phenomena both here in Brazil and in Argentina as well. And when I was there in South Africa with Matthew and Eduardo, I saw how it's a huge city, it's an amazing city, very beautiful, and they live under the speech of unsafety. There's the speech that people cannot circulate, walk around the city because it's not safe. So it doesn't allow the city to produce solidarity. So it's something that neoliberalism is placing as a blockage in the sense. And as Matthew said, with this neoliberal configuration and with the private police, these red ants, it's working a way that you cannot recover the city totally. Thank you. Now, Cacao, good afternoon. I'm not going to ask about technology now, but I wanted to ask two things. First, it was a debate that we started having in the group. What is the hijacking? What is occupation? If this category, how it is for us? Is this a legal category or a category of the occupation that are called hijackings? What does it mean, this building hijacking? And the second question is for the colleague who was talking about the women committees here in Brazil linked to PRONAS. We had a group, a process called Women for Peace, and they were working to create protection networks, sending them to school so that they could leave the drug trafficking, then they could go back to school. So it seems, I wanted to understand what is this work that these women are doing, and if there's any kind of dimension within this work so that the home violence, which is really important in terms of, we know that there's discussion of home violence and the follow-ups, and how do they do it? Is there an institution to shelter these women? We say that the state removes all these processes, but how do these women organize themselves to link this to and also in a way replace what the state should be doing in terms of women's rights because the state actually is evicting people. Thank you.
Hello.
Now, Ledilson,
Hello.
good afternoon. My name is Ledilson.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Okay, now, Tabile, introduce yourself, talk about your work. Tabile, can you hear us? Tabile, can you hear us?
Hi everyone. Yes, hi everyone. Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Go.
I'm
we can
okay.
hear you. We can hear you fine.
I don't hear you properly.
Yeah, ela não está ouvindo a gente muito bem.
Hi.
You can speak, you can introduce yourself and talk about your work. Please introduce yourself. You can speak.
Okay. All right. My name is Toby Lezondo. I'm working in Inner City Federation Women's Desk. I'm working up the GPV. You hear me? Hello.
Yes. Yes, we can hear. Yes.
Oh, all right. We're working on GPV, special a woman's. We're working with the police station, all the police stations. Okay. We're working hands on hands with the social worker in police station and the police and the station commanders. We're working hands to hands in abahlali basemjondolo and Uganda SSA.
Feedback so soon. So also the internet flow. So thank you, Beth. Also, I'd like to thank for the opportunity of being part of this panel. The information that we had is amazing, but this panel has a special interest for myself. When I came to talk to you at LASP, I want to work with urban issues through the segregation issues. I talked to Lenin, and I wanted to work with the slums, and we started thinking about occupations, and because I wanted to work with the slum tenement and study that. And I already have some answers. When you talk about the whole process that poor population is going through in Johannesburg after the apartheid, I can only think about my dynamics of gentrification. during the apartheid, the Johannesburg downtown was, after the apartheid, the black population goes back to downtown region, and the white population goes to the north region. And together with that, there's a process of impoverishment of services, and the law enforcement is tougher on the poor people. So it looks like there's an urban militarization in terms of political geography. So you really call attention that there's trying to have legal rights that should be maintained, rights that were conquered after the apartheid. In the South Africa Constitution, is that something that is similar? Lenny was talking about social occupation. Here in Rio, here we have a principle in our Constitution through the Statute of Cities, which is the social function of property. Here in Brazil, the social function of property is a mechanism of protection. Of course, it doesn't ensure the equalitarian equal treatment, but it's an asset that is demanded by social movements. Is there anything similar? So I'd like to hear from you. Thank you, Ledilson. Ludmila is going to ask once again, and then we'll have these 4 questions. 4 questions, and you want to answer first? Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you. I'm Ludmila, professor of philosophy. I'd like to congratulate you on that university, and I'm going to piggyback in all the questions because they really highlight our concerns. First, the post-apartheid, what is in this constitution that does not ensure, but it should ensure, the rights of people to have basic services that are not being given. It's the opposite, they are being removed. They should have their homes insured, and they live in precarious places. So, as it's an occupation, and you don't insure the service, but you withdraw that service. If it's a gentrification or not, which is something that was really hovering in my mind when I was listening to this. So it seems that the new city hall, the representatives that they respond to, there's an interest of we take the city to be a wider city or a city of richer people. My daughter, when she lived in Johannesburg, she was already living in the top on the place that was in 2011, 12. So it's not something so close to now, so it's really quite a while. So, and the police, when we think about it, once again, it's violent. And what's this police? Is it a white police? Is it a black police? And where the private police is inserted, how is the interest of not preserving anybody's life, this interest of the buildings and what you raise, the issues that you raised about fires is not much different that we remember in the organization, the way we build the South Zone and the fires to build the huge buildings in the South, which was almost ruined. It's not a novelty to kill people and remove people. And to conclude, for those who watch Daredevil, the present layer of the Daredevil city looks like that it has some, if this layer of Johannesburg has some connection with the Daredevil, we don't know, it's just a joke, but thank you so much for the inner city people, representatives who are here, they're awake until now. I'm a professor. And this week I have a material to work with social decolonial movements. And for me, it's really important. Thank you so much.
Obrigada, Ludmila. O livro do Matt, ele trouxe alguns
Thank you, Ludmila.
se vocês quiserem, a gente
I think Matthew brought some books, some of his books, and we can have it here. So we had this first series of questions. So we're going to ask our colleagues from Inner City Federation, Siabonga, Sifiso, and Freda. Would you like to comment some of the questions we had? There is a question for you, Freda. I'd like you to explain the work of the Women's Desk Against Domestic Violence and how women organize themselves to deal with the challenges that women are facing in the center of Johannesburg, downtown Johannesburg. And also, Sifiso, if you want, you can make comments about the questions we had here. So, Sia, would you like to make any comment? And then Freda, would you like to answer the question that was given directly to you? Would you like to comment something? Yeah.
Elizabeth, I'd like to comment on something about the issues the women in inner city of Johannesburg are facing and how to resolve it. Resolving it, we try to make, we always make workshop to educate them on how to behave and what are their rights within those particular relationship they find themselves in, like teaching them about the cohabitating within, like, because when we come from our provinces coming here to Johannesburg, we end up like, maybe I will be roaming around the street looking for the job. Then somebody approached me, maybe I'll make an example about Siabonga. Then I met Siabonga on my way looking for the job. Then he approached me and proposed me to be in love with him. Then we agreed on with each other. That's where we started cohabiting, staying together in one place. That's when the abuse started during the course of our relationship. So we teach them on how to behave and what are their rights within that particular relationship they find themselves in, and to make wills for their own kids within that particular relationship they find themselves in. And again, some of them, they end up getting married. Then we educate them on what kind of the marriage they have to choose in order for them to benefit something from that particular marriage. That's how we try to teach them on how to find themselves in a better situation, even though maybe they can't help themselves out of that particular relationship, but to know their rights and how to get out of that kind of situation they find themselves in. Thank you.
Ela se libertem. de situações de violência. Então, the movement, this table is specific, this desk is specifically to deal with domestic violence situations. Of course, violences that are results of service cuttings or evictions, but also domestic violence in this interpersonal dimension. So their work is really important because women, they refer to Tobili and to Frida because they are references, and they try to get information about the kinds of services and the kinds of rights that they have. Sia, would you like to say something? Comment the questions or say something?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes. I would like to respond in the issue of these two phrases, hijacked and occupied buildings, and then I'll deal with the issue of access to basic services. But when we speak of occupied buildings, it's where the residents, they just live together and they take care of the buildings and they take care of municipality services in terms of service in the municipal account. They are not benefiting anything that, from what they are contributing. So if, let's say, for example, the municipal account comes back and say each and every month they must pay 10,000 rand. So they divide that by each unit that it's within the property, and no one is going to be left with any cent to benefit from that money. All the money will go directly to municipal account. But when we speak of the property that is being hijacked, according to the city, they misinterpret this phrase because they are saying the occupation are hijacked buildings, while we are saying that hijacked building is where a criminal syndicate will come and demand the monthly rental from their all resident, and that money will go to one person, and that person is the one who's benefiting one or two people. Then they are making money out of something that it doesn't own, and they are benefiting out of that. So I even said to them that according to me, you can't hijack an immovable property. There is no way, or there is no such interpretation that you can hijack an immovable property. So that's how we distinguish these two, and to say in the occupation you just stay and contribute, and a hijacked property it's where you pay your monthly rental to a certain person who claims to be the owner of the property while he or she is not owning that property. And then I would like to put a comment in terms of access to basic services. Here in South Africa, one of the services that was promised in the Constitution of South Africa is water, of which everyone should have access to water, but it doesn't work like that. Instead, the city of Johannesburg official, they'll run around the inner city and disconnecting the water from these buildings that are being occupied. And they are doing that without even following a proper procedure of disconnecting a basic services from the building. Even the Municipalities Act is very, very clear. It says whenever there is communities in a particular place, the municipalities must provide the basic services to those communities, but they are acting opposite to what they are supposed to be doing. Even the mayors themselves, even the ex-mayors themselves, you will find them wearing safety boot reflectors, running around making sure that the inner city residents doesn't have access to water and electricity, of which, yes, they can't be doing that, but because they are exercising their powers in a wrong way, you will find them doing that, of which that's why the Inner City Federation has took a stance to say no to that. And that's why the Inner City Federation has taken the South African government and some other city officials, City of Johannesburg, to court to say why they are doing it against the law, why they are doing it a human right violation. And then the court will rule in the favor of the occupiers and in the favor of other inner city residents. So those are the things that we are dealing with each and every day, and of which it's being done to criminalize the poor person, and it's being done to make sure that the life that the poor people they are living, it's become more harder. They are making sure that whatever they are doing, they want to bypass the process of eviction. They are trying to do backdoor evictions. So whatever they are doing is against the law. That's why we took a stance to say we will do whatever it's in our powers to make sure that that doesn't happen in a wrong way. Thank you.
Faremos. Thank you very much, Cia. Now I'm going to pass the floor to Matthew. Thank you. I think this is something very important. There is a difference between the occupation process of, for example, in São Paulo, of our movement MST, which is the movement of no land population movement. They were not organized before the occupations, they were organized after. And this is something very difficult because ICF, they need to organize the communities that frequently are not organized. So they are trying to create committees, assemblies inside the buildings. And they are working with the population even before the occupation. So in Cape City, there are some other points of the organized movement. So it's a very difficult process because they try to organize the communities that are very fragmented, very vulnerable. Some buildings are very difficult to be occupied. So I think that we have to have this dialogue between ICF and the MST movement in São Paulo and also the movements in Cape City. I think this is very important. It's part of our project. To continue what Cia said about the word hijacked building or occupied building. It's not a word that is usually used. It's because I made a research about this. This terminology appeared in 2003, 2004 in the media, a popular terminology that the politicians were using to apply to all the occupations. But of course, there are some of these occupations that were controlled by gangs, but most of them, they are not controlled. It's a minority. So the problem is the media, the city hall, the mayor, they use this term for all the buildings without making the difference because each building has a history, a typology, an infrastructure. So they gave us as a way to justify the police evictions and the evictions they were making. The paradox of this was the first time using this terminology was in a lawsuit, and the majority of the communities, they rejected the term. So it's a very problematic situation. I don't think it's right. Of course, we have legislations against invasions, against the crime, but I don't think the terminology is adequate. We have to use a terminology that can be applied to all the cases. I think occupation is a good general term that we can use. I think that Tobili was asking about the case about domestic violence against women and the issue of the gentrification. This is something very complex because the majority of these movements downtown is not for families of the middle class. It's more for the labor class population. But there is a difference between workers. There are the ones that have permanent works, the other that have temporary works, the ones that work with the recycling material, the ones that work in the building construction, civil construction. So there are some areas with some art galleries, I would say, but the majority of the constructions are for working families. Families that have an income, a lower income. Some research of the city found that around 30,000 families that cannot access the formal housing market. So the majority of this population, they don't have access to this formal housing or social housing, the state housing. So it's a complex situation. And the question about the police. Betty could talk a little bit more about the police, but the majority of the police force is they are black, and also there was working in the security. In Johannesburg, they have a great black middle class, but the structure of the apartheid is continuing. Whiteness is not only about the skin, it's a structure of power. So there is something in South Africa that has changed, but the apartheid and the spatial structures, they are continuing. The land structures, the white population is still possess the majority of the land and the majority of the richness in the country. But of course, we can see that the structure of the apartheid is continuing. And there are something to assure the right for the housing right. But the state has the obligation to have this progressive development. It's not the right that they have now, it's the right that they will have in the future. But this is a problem because the Constitution assures the right for a property, being against the evictions, but at the same time, it's not what is really happening. Jason talked about the social function. We don't see it in South Africa. There are some activists in South Africa that would like to think that this rule in Brazil can be applied there, but not at the moment. It doesn't exist in the same sense in South Africa.
So let's open for another round of questions. Anybody would like to ask questions? Or can we conclude? Maybe we could conclude. Lenny was talking about the Johannesburg experience when he went there. One thing that really calls our attention is that you don't walk around the streets. The only place that is really, there's really movement is where it's considered dangerous, which is downtown. So in a place where there's no circulation restrictions, in Johannesburg, there's no public life, there's no public polls, so at night it's really dark. So when the night starts coming, people don't walk around, there's no public transportation because it's very precarious. It's a city that breathes separation. They cannot separate it anymore legally, but there's no public transportation to reach the place. It doesn't work all the time at night. There's no light in the streets, or it's very precarious, very poor. So also there's the securitization speech. The first thing that you hear is where you cannot walk around. We wrote a paper, me and Professor Lennon, where we've discussed the circulation dynamics. It's called The Places You Shouldn't Go To, because it was the first thing that I heard, the first information of social navigation to live in Johannesburg was to learn about the places where I should and shouldn't go. And when I was walking downtown, you said, okay, on this side of the sidewalk you can walk, but on the other side, it's not very good. What? That sidewalk on the other side of the road, yeah. That's not sold now, so I cannot ensure your safety over there. So the experience of the city is really fragmented, and the only place where you go walk is the place where people consider it dangerous. So where people can circulate freely is the place where people perceive that as a dangerous place. And also about police, there's an interesting characteristics because the South Africa police suffered the most, the boldest process of reformulation when the apartheid was ended. Everybody was retired. The whole command of the police was retired. And then there was several mechanisms to deal with the racial imbalance of the police. These commanders of the police, they founded the industry of private security in South Africa, which is the biggest in the world. So this movement of reforming the police founded a parallel structure of private security that is the biggest in the world. And I was wondering, what does the police do? Because there's nothing like the police here of Brazil. Those who do rounds in the streets are the private police because they have equipment, they have small armies. The wealthiest the place, most well equipped are their small army, and people don't call the police. My mother-in-law lived in one of these places. One day she disappeared. Nobody calls the police. We called the private security company. They activated, they launched the PBA to search my mother-in-law, and they talk to the police because people don't have contact with the police. In townships, you have some society groups, organized groups that care of situation. There is a lot of lynching. Police, they don't do an extensive rounds. And also in the color, the suburbs, which is, it's a mixed race. it's a mixed race, or they have the neighborhood watch. So they don't have the police, they have the neighborhood watch, the community, the dwellers, the inhabitants get together. What do police do? They register, they distribute guns, they register their neighborhood watch. But who really takes care of the police work in South Africa is the private security company. Based on what you're talking, in South Africa, you have this neighborhood watch, and you have this gated community. It's not like the ones that we have here in Bara, vertical or horizontal. They look like the gated communities in the United States, small micro neighborhoods where you manage the whole of the internal social life. The police doesn't go in. It's a private, militarized force, and they're really violent. As I've studied this issue, they have the right to shoot at the threats. So you have a gated community where people are shot in the streets. This private police, they have the right to kill. Based on what I've read and what I've studied on South, and this is something that really caught my attention when we talk about the close communities or condos in Brazil. We think about what's happening here. It's not as simple as that. There are several intersections with the social fabric of the neighborhood, so things are really closed and it's really complicated. So it's a very difficult city to navigate on. Really confused about so many different languages here. So Freda is there, or yet Shabonga, Sifiso, Jabili left. So we're concluding our panel. I'd really like to thank you all for being here, for your patience, all the technical issues that we had to make this conversation available, but we really wanted to include our colleagues from the Inner City Federation. Thank you, Matthew, for being here, for the effort and the work that we developed together. Thank you for the Inner City Federation colleagues. If we're not for the Inner City Federation, it's so hard to navigate in the city. Our field works wouldn't have happened. We have this without access to the field, there's no anthropology. So based on securitization process and mechanisms, it's really impossible to walk around downtown. Matt and myself, we are white people. We are Umlongo it means white people. People Umlongo, I was walking there. We are white people. We cannot walk in the city downtown. No, really, no, that's not possible. Don't do that. And our field wouldn't have happened if you were not there. Tobili, Sifiso, Freda, Siabonga, we owe our work to you, and we'll always try to find ways to repay that, so that we can learn with these movements to propose our theories and do science in the academia. So thank you for the organization of the event, Professor Lanning. Thank you so much. See you next time, and I hope that we'll have a next symposium of lesbian that we'll have in South Africa. We'll have a new South African panel. But wait. I'm thinking about the future already. But tomorrow, I'm talking about the future. A new South African panel, because it needs to be a tradition. So tomorrow the event will carry on. We'll have two other panels where Angela Baptiste, our colleague from Birmingham, will be presenting in the morning panel indicators of social impacts of research and new methodology research that will be adopted by campus, and he's part of this. He's going to share with us firsthand how this methodology of social impact and how we prove this in our research. And in the afternoon, we're going to talk about opportunities in Birmingham. So if you're thinking to go to UK, come in the afternoon, because we're going to talk about these opportunities, and it's going to be very nice. Now we're going for our coffee break. We have actually it's a closing coffee break of the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you.